Well, hello and welcome back to In the Word. It's Tuesday and we are going through Revelation, the last book in our series from Romans to Revelation. We'll be finishing up in early October. My recollection is that it'll be about the 4th of October, if I'm right. And then we'll take a little break and then resume after I take a break. We're in chapter 5 today. As I said yesterday, chapters 4 and 5 fit together. They really answer the question, who is worthy to judge? We saw in chapter 4 that we've seen God on his throne. Throne is a repeated word. I think it's repeated 11 times in 9 different verses in the 11 verses of chapter 4. So his royal authority is at the forefront. Here in chapter 5, then we see the judgment delegated to the Son. So I've divided this into 3 sections, 3 bite-sized pieces to help you get through it. Chapter 5, verses 1 through 4 is really raising the question that I mentioned yesterday: who is worthy to bring judgment on the earth? Starting in chapter 6, we're going to see God's wrath poured out on the earth. Chapters 4 and 5 establish who is worthy to do such a thing. Beginning in verse 5 then of chapter 5 and going down to verse 10, we see the answer to that question. Christ is worthy. I'll get into the details there in just a moment. And then after the revelation of the worthiness of Jesus to bring judgment on the earth, we see in verse 11 through the end of the chapter just worship in heaven. So remember that this is a scene that is in heaven. We started out with a heavenly scene, John beholding Jesus in his glory. The scene shifted in chapters 2 and 3 to the earth and the conditions in the churches at that time. And as I told you, that's exemplar for the churches that are on the earth even today. And then we shift to chapter 4 and 5. The view shifts back to heaven. So gets us back and forth from heaven to earth. And we see this, I'll point this out as we go through Revelation. It happens over and over. So let's take a look here in a little bit more detail, verses 1 through 5. We see John weeping, perhaps weeping because God's will is going to continue to be hidden. It won't be made clear, or perhaps it's going to be delayed in its execution. John is weeping and asking who is worthy in verse 2 to open the scroll and break its seals. So what he is seeing here is this scroll with 7 seals on it, and we'll see how that develops in the book. Lots of speculation as to what that scroll is: a will, a deed for the earth. I like Mark Hitchcock's view on this. This is a testamentary deposition which allocates land. And interestingly enough, Mark points out in his book, The End, that it's the only scroll in ancient times with 7 seals on it. So I'd encourage you, if you want to dig into this a little bit more, Mark's book, Mark Hitchcock, Dr. Mark Hitchcock from Dallas Seminary, also pastors a church in Tulsa, has a book called The End, which highly readable, a little intimidating because it's a long book, but very readable. I'd recommend that. Verses 5 through 10 then, I said Christ is worthy, and what we see here is we see the elders that were introduced in chapter 4, the 4 living creatures that were introduced in chapter 4, and then angels, and ultimately every living creature in heaven and earth are worshiping the Lamb. And this is, you'll see beginning in verse 9, 4 reasons why he is worthy. So beginning in verse 9, they ascribe worth to him. They say that he is worthy to take this scroll and to open its seals. Gives you 4 reasons for that. The first is that he was slain, that he died for sinners. and it says that by his blood he ransomed people for God. So that's the second reason. He not only did he submit to death, but in that death he ransomed people for God by his blood. He ransomed them from every tribe and language and people and nation. Again, some people look at this and they'll say, well, here it is. Everyone is going to be saved in the end. That's not what it's saying. It's not saying that everyone from every tribe, nation, language, and people is going to be saved, but people from all those. In other words, salvation is really indiscriminate. And then it says he made them kingdom and priests to our God, so they have that priestly or function and that kingdom role, which they will consummate or fully realize when Jesus returns, which is made clear in verse 4, that they shall reign on the earth with him. So these people that Jesus has saved, these church age people, are going to be reigning with Christ on the earth, and it's looking forward to Jesus's millennial reign, which will be introduced in Revelation chapter 20. The response to that in heaven is, of course, worship, beginning in verse 11. We see, worthy is the Lamb who was slain. So we see the second time that question is answered. John raises the question in verse 2. It's answered twice. Who is worthy to open the scroll, break the seals? The Lamb is worthy to do that. And again, this, I think verse 13, in my view, of course, there's different views on these things, but in my view, in verse 13 is anticipating the culmination of all things. Philippians 2:7 or someplace in that area talks about every knee will bow. It's quoting Isaiah 42, I believe, and assigning that to Jesus, that every knee is going to bow to him and every tongue will confess to him that he is Lord, and whether they are believers or unbelievers. And we're going to see as we go through the book of Revelation, incredibly enough, people are going to recognize that it is God, the God of the Bible, the God of heaven and earth, who is bringing judgment on the earth, and yet they'll continue to resist him. Incredible as that may seem, I think the people who are going to be going to hell are going to be shaking their fist at God all the way to hell and beyond while they are in hell. So that's chapter 5 in your reading today. I pray that this is encouraging you, the whole series, to be in the Word, that you can get in there, you can read it, you can understand it, that you're being built up in the Word. Edified is the word, and that being encouraged and edified, you're also being equipped to do the work that God has given you to do in his church. So God bless you, brothers and sisters. Enjoy your reading today. Tomorrow we see the beginning of the period that's called the tribulation. Jeremiah called it the time of Jacob's trouble. So God bless you, and we'll see you tomorrow.